This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.
Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson. It's my pleasure to have with us once again the rather erudite, rather unappreciated Dr. Buck Melton.
Oh, I thought after our most recent taping you were going to call me President Melton.
Oh, well, I could do that. Yes, yes. Well, you're an unappreciated candidate for president, I would say.
I wouldn't take it for $1 million. Well, for $1 million,
well, you
we
might.
could talk.
Yeah, if the price. Well, I think they get 400. So maybe if they increase the wages a little bit, it'll be an attractive arrangement for you. Well, we've talked about different things, and one of the things that confronts the country now, and more, we'll speak about it in more detail, are the immigration policies that are out there, and the role of immigration policies in securing nation states. So can a nation state exist with presumably no open borders? And is there such a country anywhere? There might be. Are there countries that have open borders, anyone can go there, live there with no encumbrances? Poor people can move in, anybody can go there. Is there such a place in the 21st century?
I don't know of one. There have been, of course, geographical regions in world history of which that is true.
Yes.
North America being,
sure.
Since we're
South
Americans, the immediate
anyways.
one that comes to mind. The old saw, which I think has been disproved by Snopes and others, that in the 1870s, an Indian chief told the Vice President of the United States, "You need to be careful with your immigration policy. Please note that we were not very careful with ours."
That's pretty funny, isn't it?
But certainly today, I think not, and I think that's interesting because passports became such a big deal only in the past century or so.
Yes.
A lot of that was coming out of World War I. So the modern policing of borders is a pretty well accepted thing.
Well, I'm just thinking about it. So sometimes people, it's, well, not anyone can come here, and many countries say, well, you can come here if you bring a lot of money with you. And I think if I can recollect that, you could buy, at least some years ago, you could buy a Peruvian passport for $25,000. Mm-hmm. And many places, I think Australia, New Zealand, if you show up there with a lot of money, they'll let you in, and you can. I think that's not an uncommon arrangement. So countries, we have closed borders unless you pay to get in. That might be fairly common.
Yes, and I would like to say that you can pay in many ways.
Yes.
So, for instance, the idea that in the United States, down until 1965, certain groups were shown preference to get in, and it would be groups who would somehow contribute substantially to the GDP through their skill, for instance, doctors, lawyers,
yes.
something like that. So it's not necessarily just a matter of pay us X money. It's come here and be productive.
Well, I guess that's a point I was moving on to, but you made it. And the idea is that countries have different ways that they say, we police our borders with the idea that we're only going to let people in that we think will benefit our nation state. And along with that, I think I can think of at least one country that is so underpopulated that it does things like it encourages people to come there, gives them passports, and that's Russia. So Russia has this terrific population problem, and they not only do they try and get people in, particularly immigrants from other places that they let them in, please come. Another country might be Israel, who say, well, if you're anywhere, if you match our genetic arrangements, you have an open, you can always come here. We want you to come here. Not only do we want you, just like the Russians, we'll give you money, we'll do this, we'll do that, just to encourage you to come. So I think that it's sort of part of the same arrangement. However, countries are choosing who comes, and sometimes there are no barriers. The country says, I'm making the decision, we need this kind of person, and you can come here and we'll do things for you. And maybe in a way, the U.S. has done that in the past, particularly in easing the way, which I think they might still do. If you're a nuclear physicist that need you, will try and do something. So I think that's an issue that's there with the nation states. Now another arrangement might be if you, those are things that strictly are in the obvious interests of the nation state. Now sometimes the nation state has a charitable, or they want to be charitable. So they might say, well, you have relatives that are overseas, and we want those relatives to come here because that's what a kind person would do. That'll make your life better. And so if one member of your group is here, then the so-called chain migration. So everyone can come, and the idea is that relatives, spouses, you have this open door in a way, and that might be, I'm not sure how it is around the world, but obviously there are countries that do that, particularly this country. And I think, as I can understand this, we might have discussed this earlier, this was put in the U.S. in the 1965 change in our immigration policy. The idea was that if you did this, the people of Northern European descent would come because their families were here. Can you comment on those issues?
Well, not to a great degree. I'm not an immigration specialist, but I think one thing I'd like to backtrack about a little bit too is the thing that makes some people nervous and bothered by this is when you start talking about can you bring money or can you bring a useful skill, it starts skirting towards the commodification of the idea of humanity. And this is always a subject that is very touchy, at some level, yes, we can set a value on each human life, at least generically.
Yes.
When you're building a high-rise or a construction project, how many people are going to die doing this? That's going to affect the insurance rates. And for the United States, with its civil libertarian tradition, with its Western idea of the innate dignity of every human being, an ideal that we've not always lived up to, but it's one that we've aspired to. The idea that this person is good enough to come here and that person is not good enough to come here, that makes people queasy. And I think that the 65 law scaled that down somewhat and simply said, let's just let more people in. Let's quit asking how good they are for the country and ask more, how good is it for them? And that's really become the trend today.
Well, not everywhere, but I guess we sort of sailed the ship in that direction. So traditionally, the idea is what's going to be beneficial for the country. Now, the other issue is out there is refugees, which is there's a United Nations issue. So right now, the population of the world is approaching 8 billion, and the story is quite a different one now, in that the developed world, if you want to use that terminology, maybe a billion people live there, some figure like that, where the life is actually pretty good, the health system is pretty good, the people have enough to eat. And then the tremendous part of the world is underwater. It really is just awful. So if you had if you were an electrician in, I don't know, Bogota or rural Bogota, I mean, maybe the situation is not so great. Were you able to make the transition to Boston, your everything would just be so much better, the benefits this. So with everything else equal, your preference might be to live in another place. However, the situation would have to be pretty extreme for you to leave your kith and kin and go somewhere else. But the number of people that find themselves in those circumstances is enormous.
Yes.
And it's an exponential curve. So the situation exists with our 8 billion people on the planet that, I'll pick a number, maybe 1 billion of them, are in such terrible circumstances that just getting to a developed country would be unbelievably good. And once they're in that country, the safety net takes care of them. So, and indeed, we've discussed this before, they may even be benefits of affirmative action. So depending on their ethnicity, they can get into in a prosperous country, the country may believe that they are entitled to extra protection and extra rights. And so it's a tremendous pull toward people trying to get there. And I think we're seeing those circumstances in Europe and here in North America, and it's a substantial problem. So you sort of touch the heart of it in a way when people, the initial idea, I think, with the refugee arrangement would be that somebody is in just a terrible state of affairs. They're I don't know, the wrong skin color, or they're the wrong political party, and they're in prison, and they've had all their teeth pulled out, and they're cutting ears off, and their children are being whatever, and the sense of mercy and the door would be open in those circumstances. But the preponderant arrangement that seems to be occurring is just the general societal failure. They're coming from failed states, and I believe President Trump used a coarser turn of phrase as he described these failed states. He sometimes does that, but in any event, yes. But in any event, the arrangement now is, if you have economic problems, do you have a right to be in a place that's much better for you and your family? And presumably you're going to at some point make some substantial contribution, and what should be done ethically under these circumstances. And I'll put that question to you, and everyone is pondering what the story is. The Australians, for instance, they don't let people come in like that. They pick and choose, and if someone comes in, they put them on sort of a desert island. You can't come in there, and you're just immediately sent back. They have the virtue of being an island country, and a country like Hungary, they totally electrify their fences. They keep people out. Comments?
Yes, I think ultimately it comes down to the balance between, and I see this model more and more frequently as I age, I suppose. I don't know. It's the balance between collectivism and individualism. That the United States has one of the greatest economies in the world, if not the greatest. It certainly has been the greatest for a long time. It's got one of the best GDPs, and so on the one hand, we want to be able to share this, but on the other hand, every barrel has a bottom, and it comes back to a question of how long can we sustain this? How long can we keep this up? How much charity are we capable as a state of doling out without losing our ability to keep doling it out? At some point, we have to get some work out of the people who are here, whether they were born here or whether they came from somewhere else. And I believe I referred to John Galt in our
Yes.
recent episode. But it's true. At some point, what happens if the most productive members of society say, you have made it too onerous for us, you have made it not worth our while, we quit, find somebody else to be the producers, then instead of making the world America with the Protestant work ethic and the Puritan notion of the fair price and these sort of things, we let the world remake us. And then where is the last best hope? Is it China? Is it North Korea? Is it Russia? Do you really see one of these countries becoming the city on a hill?
Yes. Well, now, one of the things that's a special problem for the U.S., and maybe not so much for Europe, I think. They have their national identities are pretty much written in stone. I mean, they have a different story here. We've said this before, an unusual country that doesn't really have a sense of long history, ethnicity. Maybe the different ethnic groups have been mean to each other, which is an understatement. It's an understatement, but I mean, all kinds of societal tensions. And if the diversity of the country increases and continues to increase with porous borders, and it also has some economic challenges that happened, and we also have this affirmative action card in the deck. It seems to me that we're going to have a lot of problems. We also have language, commonality of the country. So the ability to police the borders seems to be the sine qua non of the nation state. I just have to say that. And it appears that many people don't want the borders policed.
Well, you've raised a very important distinction, because I was about to remark on the fact that you keep using the word, the ability to police the borders.
Yes.
We certainly have the ability. We do not have the will.
Yes, and let's query that. Why is it, we've sort of been through this about immigration policy, why is it the U.S. cannot put an effective barrier, to use a word that's a tough one, a barrier for free entrance into the place? Why can't we put a barrier there? Well, one substantial reason might be morality. Nobody, the TVs or cameras are there. No one wants to see a mother, I don't know, knocked down by a billy club and their small child attacked by a police dog. I mean, it just, so we have a ethical issue with how that is, what do we do? I mean, it's a very vexing problem as to how to handle that. The other issue that's out there is different people in society get some advantages out of this. Yes. And we can look on the let's see, on the right, with the Republicans, you have lots and lots of people that are desperate to work, and they can be exploited. So if you have a big factory, and this has happened, I think, in the Midwest, a person had a large meat packing plant, and they discovered he was making a lot of money off people. You can underpay them. You can do this. You can do that.
Exactly.
You can. So many people.
It's the Mudsill argument.
Many people want to do this. They say, I can, or, you know, I mean, I've had problems with, you name it, anything. I can't find an employee that I can pay any money to, I don't know, clean the snow up or cut the grass. I just can't find a single human being. The grass is growing. We really, and the demographics are out there. We don't have any young people. So people on the right encourage this and resist efforts to put an effective immigration policy in there.
And I would say as an addendum to that, and something we've both remarked on before in this show, that the recent immigrants are often the hardest working people in America.
Absolutely.
That they do stuff that you and I would turn our noses up at.
Well, let's give them some praise for
Yes.
that. And I mean, I don't want to deprecate the integrity or just the general character of people that are coming 10,000 miles. Yes. And they're often, their character and general everything is superior to many people.
They're the real Americans.
That's right. They really are quite meritorious. Yes. Well, and people exploit that a bit. Now, on the other side, yeah. On the other side, to the left of this situation, I will just say the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party has become I guess the Democrats out there, I don't want to be particularly mean to you, but that's my observation, is that they are really putting together an enormous coalition to redistribute wealth in the country, to really change the nature of the country. And one of the things they're attempting to do is every person that comes across is going to be a voter for their side. That might not be totally correct, but it's close to it. And so if they look at the demographics, they say, well, I'm expecting to, as a party operative, the more people that come in, I'm going to get a job as I'll become the assistant tax collector in Cook County. And from that, I will get a tremendous job to do whatever. And the other thing that's out there is that tyrants really depend on people that desire redistribution of wealth. So if you're a tyrant and your purpose is a lot of poor people are coming in, I'm going to use their votes, and they'll always vote for me, and I will then extract money from other people, give them to this class of people. And then what I will obtain from this is enormous power and the ability to basically become, you could say, under worse circumstances, a petty dictator. I mean, if that's the way things go from the time of Aristotle, I mean, noting that the next stage after a democratic system would be a democratic system where the voters were getting compensated for putting a particular person in power, and that relationship would ultimately turn that person into a tyrant. Yes. And that's could be something to brood about.
Well, you don't have to go back to Aristotle. I mean, look at the United States, look at New York, look at the people coming in from Ellis Island in the 1890s, early
Yes.
1900s. The party bosses waiting at the wharves saying, here, let me steer you
Yes.
to a nice boarding house, and by the way, I
Right.
hope, yeah. And yeah, the demographics show recent immigrants tend to vote left. So in other words, the immigrant vote is being used by the left. If you cannot change the mind of the voters, then change the voters.
And so those are the other issue that's out there is what happened. Let's see, this would have been in the 1970s, I believe, as Ronald Reagan put his immigration change in place. Is what he did was he basically said, well, if you're here illegally, we're going to make you legal, and then that'll just stop any immigration from coming. Well, it turns out there's also a large constituency of people that have their fellow countrymen in another part of the world, and they'd like to have their aunt and their mother-in-law there, maybe their mother-in-law, but sundry people coming in, and there's a ready acceptance in these communities that are there, and the politicians that control those communities are encouraging this. They're resisting the idea of putting any kind of open borders there. Now, if we cannot have open borders, if the borders are open, what happens? We have an open border. Right now, I think the number of people that were born overseas is about 10% or over that. The last time that occurred was 1920 or so. What happens if the number of people here go to 20% that were born overseas? I mean, any comments? Well, that's a lot of people, and it might be hard to get there.
Well, given that the apparatus of the state is so ubiquitous now, there's so many programs, there's so many things you have to sign up for, except for voting. Apparently, we can't have voter ID laws in a lot of places. If you're not going to register, if you will, somebody at the border, you have to register them at some point. When the child goes to school, when you're registering for benefits, for entitlements, or something like this. And so that's where it would take place. And you simply say citizenship isn't a factor for these things. I mean, it's already law that the Equal Protection Clause says in certain circumstances, for instance, if you're an illegal immigrant or the children of illegal immigrants, you still get the right to a public education. So there'll still be registration. We'll still know who you are and where you come from, but it doesn't matter now where you come from. It's simply, do you want an entitlement? Sign up here.
I guess the point I'm making a bit is that assuming that we have an open border, porous borders, then the national identity of the country becomes very difficult. The other point is, and maybe this is what people would say President Trump is doing, and with all his defects, but what's the wellspring? What's the wellspring of his attraction? Is that he's saying, well, I say I'm a nationalist. I'm going to close the borders, and what that's doing is sort of playing to the European American nativist population that's been here for a long time. And that tension tighter seems to be woven into the political discourse we have, and it's a fairly spooky one. It appears to me. I mean, the way things worked out in the 1920s is things cooled down a bit. There was an immigration restriction, yes. And then by say 1950, everything was really quite much better as far as tension goes, I would say. I mean, maybe I'll throw that out.
And I think there are reasons for that. We are certainly not, and we have never been an ethnic nation. That word nation has tended to have ethnic overtones.
Yes.
And, one of the great ancient examples would be the nation of Israel, the tribes of Israel. Greece was a nation without being a state. People use those two words
Yes.
interchangeably, but they are not. We are a nation state, but our nation is based on the civic notion coming out of Europe in general, Christianity in general, and England in particular, of the idea of respect for the dignity of the individual, respect for the individual rights, respect for the rule of law, the idea that we all more or less play according to the rules. And all of those have been challenged. They've been challenged very strongly. I think a lot of the challenge came out of the new left of the 50s and 60s. And so that idea of commonality that we all have, or at least we all should have, has been shattered or at least deeply undermined. It's now more of a collective ideal, and collectivism and internationalism. Borders do not matter, it's your class membership that matters. And so you're talking at a very fundamental level, even if there is still technically an entity called the United States, where that entity no longer is as important as it was. And I think that's where we're headed.
Well, just to continue with that, so if the nation state, so if the idea of a nation sort of goes away, I mean, that we have such a diverse population with different incentives for behavior, cultural barriers everywhere, all kinds of animosities that are present. So it's hard to say, well, I'm really connected with that person. The person doesn't speak the same language, has different value system, eats different food, does this, does that, just behaves in different ways. We're left with a state. And so is that something, as we discuss the nation state, is the concept of a nation getting to be less and less as the world moves around, as people are going back and forth. There's also many families that have their mother and father from different places. I'm not sure I can particularly make this argument. I'm going to try and make it. Is that that people have in this one world arrangement, they're moving around a lot. And so the nation has all these bad things attached to it. It causes bad behavior, it does this, it does that. On the other hand, a state can put regulations on board that basically can moderate human behavior. So, and you mentioned laws, you mentioned this and you mentioned that. So is the idea of a nation state, is that something that people are looking at it in a closer way? So nation states cause all kinds of problems. They cause wars, they cause this, they also cause a restriction in economic prosperity, presumably. The tariffs are put in there, comparative advantage goes away. And you could make the case that, say, the best thing for the world in the 22nd century might be not to have nation states, but to have a sort of a great world state. And many people, I think, that was after the problems of the 20th century, the World War I, the World War II, communism. The U.S. won these three great wars, and the new order that people spoke about, the new world order, if we can remember that phrase, would be something like a great world state with free interchange of people moving across, going here, going there. And I would say many people in some intellectual circles, this was an idea as witnessed by a lot of the free trade arrangements, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the rise of China, sundry things that are in that direction that have some attractiveness to them. And President Trump is, in some ways, wanting to go toward a nation state, which has another set of arguments that support it. But is that one of the things we're facing today? And is the nation state a useful thing to have? I'll throw that out.
Well, we have to remember that the idea of the state is a fairly recent thing in human history, and we have to wind down here, but it's only 700-800 years old, that humanity can survive without the notion of state. So there was a time when it didn't exist. There may be a time in the future when it doesn't exist. I would say the internationalist notion that if we do away with the statehood concept, there will be no more conflict among the brotherhood of man is just completely naive. You just break the teams down in a different way, and the fighting goes on, especially as we get more and more people and fewer resources to share out.
Well, I think we have to sort of conclude, but what I would say is the brain is imposing with its behavior, so hardwired. Our brain has its hardwired aggressive arrangements and also its humanistic arrangements there, so we have to sort of balance that out. And in this complicated world we have, I think it's useful to have this interchange, the one we've had tonight, which we sort of wandered around in the subject a bit, but maybe that was useful for our spectators.
One hopes.
Okay, good. Well, thanks a lot.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.